Students, now the next way of the pollination, next way of the pollinating agency is the animal pollinating agency. As like we have discussed the abiotic factors, the abiotic factors are the wind and the water. So when wind is the working as the pollinating agency, then it is called as the anemophilic pollination or anemophily. And secondly, when it is the water when water work as the pollinating agency, then it is called as what, hydrophilic pollination. Now some of the biotic resources are also there. Those biotic resources are working as the pollinating agencies. So biotic resources means basically the animals are working as the pollinating agency. So how the animals are working for the pollination, or how these are working are helpful in the process of pollination, we are just going to take a look on that. So the topic is zoophily. The third way of the pollinating agency is the animal. So the pollination by the mean of animal, by the use of animal, is called as zoophily. So zoophily means the pollinating agencies are animals. Animals are involved in shifting of the pollen grains from one place to the another place. So let us see how many types of the zoophily is there, how many types of animals involved there in the process of pollination. On the basis of that, the zoophily may be of the following type. Are you getting what I'm saying? How many animals or how many types of animals involved in the process of pollination? On the basis of that, the zoophily is of the following type. The first one is entomophily. Entomophily means, entomophily, once again the phily means the pollination. Entomo word is used for the insects. Insect study is called as, or insect science is called as entomology. So when the insects are working as the pollinating agency, or means what, when the pollination is being performed with the help of insect, then it is called as entomophily. Entomophily is the most common mode of the zoophily, and even though it is considered as the most common way of the pollination also. So is it clear? The entomophily means what? When the pollinating agencies are the insect, when pollination occurs with the help of insect, and this is the most common way of the zoophily. And even remember, the most common animal pollinator, most common zoophilic pollinator is honeybee. It is reported that more than 80% of the cases are being intermediated by the honeybee only. So are you getting my point? The insect when pollinate, when insect intermediate the process is called as entomophily. This is most common way, and the most common insect which is being used, or an animal which is being used is the animal with most common animal which is used for the pollination purpose is insect. And in insect, the honeybee is the most common type of the organism which is used for the pollination. More than 80% cases are being reported with the honey only. So let us see, let us take a look, what are the basic properties of the flowers, those who are being pollinated with the help of insects. The properties of the flower. So remember, any of the flower which are being pollinated with the help of insect, they should have three basic properties. In Hindi we can say rang, sugandh and makarand. हिंदी में हम कहते हैं रंग, सुगंध और मकरंद, कलर, नेक्टर एंड स्मेल. दीज आर द थ्री बेसिक प्रॉपर्टीज of the flower for which the insects are roaming or moving toward the flowers, and they are helping in the process of pollination. Remember, the insect pollination is a kind of give and take type of interaction, where insects are receiving something from the flower. In terms of them, they are just giving some the reward to the flower, that they are helping in the process of pollination. Are you getting my point? Here insects are rewarded by the nectar from the flower side, and the flowers are rewarded by the nectar that they are flowers are rewarded by the insect that they are helping in the process of pollination. So just see the properties of that. The flowers are brightly colored. You can understand very well. The nectar is the material, the nutritive material for which the insects are searching the flowers. They are just moving to the flower. The smell, very important property. The flowers are very specific. Flowers are having very specific smell. The flowers are ornamental. They are very beautiful flowers. I'm just going to discuss these points. Why the color is important in these? because insects are having compound vision. The vision is very poor, so that is why they are not having a very clear image of any of the objects. So to attract the insect toward them, the flowers are brightly colored so that they can be visible from a distant object or distant from a distance. Also an insect can easily visualize them. Smell, some of the flowers, those who are not having the bright color appearance, these flowers are having good smell, because the flowers, those who are pollinating during the night, so they cannot be visualized by the insect. So for that situation they are having a good smell. So this is what the night blossom flower are having, the greater smell or bigger better smell than the flowers those who are blossom during the day. Second thing, next property of those flowers, they produce the pollen grains. That pollen grain is sticky in nature. Whatever the pollen grain is being produced by the entomophilous flower, the pollen grains are sticky in nature. If you have remember that sticky nature is being provided by a specific substance which is being released or formed by the tapetum thereon. So that substance is called as pollen kit. So pollen kit is present on the surface of pollen grain. Due to the presence of pollen kit on the surface of pollen grain, they become sticky, and the stickiness is very important for such kind of the pollen grain, because they are being easily attached or affixed to the surface of body to the insect. They are large in size. The purpose of the large size flower is that they could be easily visualized. As we have discussed, now the insect are not having very clear vision, they are having a compound vision, they are having a poor vision. So remember one very important point that I am just going to make it clear here. The bees are color blind to the red colored flower. The bees are color blind to the red colored flower, means the bees cannot visualize the red colored flower. So they visit on the yellow or violet or the purple flower. This is very crucial point. Bees are color blind to the red colored flower, so that is why they are visiting on the yellow flower or violet flower or the purple flower. So is it clear to you all? The bees are color blind to the red, that is why they are visiting toward the yellow, violet and purple. So these are the properties of the flowers which are being pollinated with the help of the insects. So just see what are the floral rewards for the insect. Floral rewards for the insect means what? The insect is rewarded by the flowers in terms of their pollination, because we have just discussed this is a kind of give and take relationship. So what are the rewards is given to the insect for the purpose of nectar. यहाँ कुछ उधार नहीं है, everything is being paid then and there only. What is there? The nectar, the basic for which the insect is visiting toward the flowers. The pollen grains, they are just getting as their nutrient material. In some of the flowers, they are providing a safe place for the laying eggs. Are you getting my point? Some of the flowers are providing the safe place for laying the egg. The example for that type of the flower is Amorphophallus. Amorphophallus flower is having around 6 meter in the height, and they are providing a great passage or they are providing a great place for laying eggs. So that is what the three basic properties, three basic rewards insect received from the flower. That is what? Nectar, then pollen grain, and the safe place for the laying egg. So now one very important term, sometimes some of the insects are not useful for the pollination, then too they are using the pollen grains from the flowers. Are you getting my point? Some of the insects are there, those insects are not helpful in the pollination, then too they are using or consuming the pollen grains and the nectar. So such kind of insects are called as pollen robbers. Pollen robbers means the insect which consumes the pollen grain but without helping in the process of pollination. Why this is so? Because pollination is a kind of mutual relationship. They are giving and taking something. So here what happens? Without giving anything, they are just taking the pollen grains. So this is what a kind of robbery. So pollen grains are robbed by such kind of the insect, because they are not helping in the process of pollination, but they are just doing whatever they wish. So example for the pollen robber is the queen of an insect, that is Bombus aphanis. It perforates the plant Aquilia spurs. So now moving on to the next. And whatever the questions, now we are just going to discuss. These questions are very important for your final examination. Just listen carefully. We are just going to discuss the special cases of entomophily. Some special cases, special conditions are there of the entomophily that we are just going to discuss. Special cases means some specific examples are there. Those examples are being modified as per the need of the pollination. So first of all, the first and very important question in salvia. Salvia is the example of the plant where the specific mode of entomophilic pollination is occurs. So in salvia, the lever mechanism is being observed. Lever mechanism are that is called as turnpike mechanism. So if question asked there in your examination ki how does pollination occur in the salvia, so the answer will be the lever mechanism or the turnpike mechanism. So what is specific about the salvia and how the pollination occurs? Just take a look on that. The salvia flower is having bi-lipped corolla. Bi-lipped corolla means the corolla is divided into two lips, upper lip and the lower lip, and which is having one stigma and the two stamens attached to it. Are you getting my point? Bi-lipped corolla, upper lip and the lower lip with the two stamens attached to it. And very crucial point, very important point, out these stamens, only anterior lobe of the anther is fertile while posterior lobe is sterile. Are you getting my point? The anterior part of stamen or anther is fertile and posterior part remains sterile. In the process, the posterior part combines to form an sterile plate, and similarly the anterior part is going to form the fertile plate. Are you getting my point? What is the meaning of fertile and sterile? Fertile means the part which is responsible for the pollen grain production and having responsibility or having capacity to produce the pollen grain. So till now it is clear to you all. The corolla of salvia is bilipped with the two stamen and stigma present. The stamens are having two different nature. One, the anterior part is fertile, the posterior part is sterile. The anterior part combines to form the fertile plate while posterior part combine to form the sterile plate. So when insect sits on the lower lip of the corolla, when insect sits on the lower lip of corolla, just listen carefully. When insect sits on the lower lip of corolla, because these plates are arranged on the lower lip of corolla, the upper lip is having the stigma, upper lip is having stigma and the lower lip is having what? Stamen. So when the insect sits on the lower lip of corolla for the purpose of nectar collection, so what it does, the insect is usually sits on the sterile plate because the nectaries are lying inside or deeper into the flower. So when insect enters inside, so it will sit on the sterile plate, and during that course, due to the pressure generated, due to the force generated, the fertile plates comes and touch the surface of the touch the body surface of the insect. Are you getting my point? When it enters in the flower, sits on the sterile plate that is lying on the lower lip of the corolla, due to the pressure, the fertile plate comes and touch the surface of the body of the insect, and due course of the time it release out the pollen grain on the surface of the body of the insect. Now insect release out from here, and when it moves on to the next flower, it will come in the touch of the stigma, and then it will be discharged, the pollen grain will be discharged onto the stigma of the flower. So this is called as the lever mechanism, because as the sterile plate is there, so sterile plate, when it sits on the sterile plate, the fertile plate touches the body as the lever works, and the pollen grain shifted onto the body of insect. Now the pollen grains will be carried by these insect to the next flower. Whenever it sits on that next flower, the pollen grain will be transferred to the stigma. So just take a look like that. I have just prepared a diagram here. What happened? This is a bi-lipped condition, upper lip and lower lip. The upper lip is having stigma while lower lip is having two stamens. The anterior part is the fertile part and the posterior part is the sterile part. When insect enters here, nectaries are lying here. So when insect enters here, to get the to get the nectars, it sits on the sterile plate. When it sits on the sterile plate, due to the pressure exerted, now the fertile plates come on the top of the insect's body. Now they are dropping the pollen grains onto the body of insect, and now insect release out from the body, insect release out from the flower and move on to the next flower. When it sits on there, so the stigma will receive the pollen grain from there. So this is very specific mechanism occurs or observed there in the salvia. So now very next to that we are moving on to the next, that is Aristolochia. Aristolochia is a specific type of flower which develop a smell, a full smell of decaying tobacco, like that tobacco leaves are just getting decayed. So the flower is going to develop such kind of the smell. The decaying smell is developed or produced by the Aristolochia flower, and due to that full smell, the flies are being attracted toward the flies are being attracted toward the flower. That mechanism where flies are being trapped for the purpose of pollination, that mechanism was called as fly trap mechanism. What is fly trap mechanism? When the flies are being trapped inside the body of flower for the purpose of pollination, so that mechanism is called as fly trap mechanism. If we are just going to take a look on the structure of the flower, so flower is having a long perianth tube with the hairs in it. I'm just going to provide a short structure here. The flower is having a long perianth with a tube-like structure. In a tube-like structure, it is filled with the hairs. The hairs are tightly packed here. So whenever insect enters in the body of the flower, so it has to pass through the hair so that it could collect the nectars from here. So whenever it is passing through the here, so what will happen? The hairs will have the pollen grains, and that will be deposited on the surface of the body of insect. And insect cannot release out from that. So that is why forcefully the pollen grains are shifted onto the body of insects. Now what happens at the time of releasing out of the insect, the direction of the perianth tube is being changed. So what will happen? The hairs will get relaxed, and when the hairs will get relaxed, the insect can move out, and once again whenever it is going to sit on the female flower, it will pollinate that, it will transfer the pollen grains to the female flower. So is it clear to you? What will happen in the fly trap mechanism? The insect moved inside the long perianth tube. Due to the congested hair present in that with the pollen grains, insect will be loaded with the pollen grains. Whenever it is going to release out, it will discharge the pollen grain onto the stigma of that. That is what the specific mechanism of pollination there in the Aristolochium. The next example is ficus or fig. The ficus or fig is once again having very specific mode of pollination. The pollinating agency for the pollination in the fig is a wasp. Wasp is Blastophaga glacerum. The pollination in the fig is being performed by an wasp, that is called as Blastophaga glacerum. What is specific in the pollination? The pollination occurs in terms of the egg laying. The wasp enters inside the flower to perform the egg laying in the ovule of the flower, and in due course of the ovulation, in due course of the movement of the wasp inside the flower and coming out of the flower, the pollen grains are loaded on the body of the insect. So let's see how it is done. So the flower of the fig or ficus is very specific. It is having the hypanthodium inflorescence. It is having the hypanthodium inflorescence. What is the meaning of hypanthodium inflorescence? Hypanthodium inflorescence is a kind of closed inflorescence where the male and female reproductive parts are lying closer together. They aggregate, they come closer to each other, and they make a kind of matched network of the male and female reproductive part. So the flower is having the inflorescence is having three types of the flower. One is male flower and two types of the female flower. One type of the male flower, three types. The inflorescence is having three types of the flower. One type of the male flower and two types of the female flower. The male flower is always fertile flower. The two types of female flower. One flower is the fertile flower, that is long stylate. Another one which is short stylate, that is an sterile flower and called as the gall flower. Are you getting my point? In female, two type of flower. One is long stylate, that is called as fertile flower. which able to produce the female gametes or mega gametes, and second one short stylate is called as the gall flower, that is called as what, the sterile flower. So just see here, this is a kind of spanthodium inflorescence of the ficus. Here the three different type of the flowers are present. That is what the male flower. In male flower the anthers are present. They are just densely packed here. This is very much difficult to find out where the male flower or where the female flower is there. Secondly, two types of the female flower. One is long stylate. That is what the long style is present. This is what a functional flower, or we can say the fertile flower. And second one, non-fertile or sterile flower, that is gall flower, a short stylate flower. This flower will be used by insect for the purpose of egg laying. The gall flower will be used by the insect for the purpose of egg laying. What happened during the process of pollination? The flower is completely closed instead of a single opening. The flower is completely closed instead of a single opening. The single opening of the flower is called as ostiole or ostium. Ostiole or ostium. So due to the ostiole, the insect moved inside and moving from here and search the gall flower here only, and in due course of the searching of the gall flower, it has to pass through the many of the male flowers. When it comes inside the gall flower, lays the egg, and the larva will hatch out and will move out easily from the flower. But in due course of the laying of the egg and coming and moving out through the ostiole, the insect or the wasp is loaded with the pollen grains from the anther. Are you getting my point? And whenever it is moving on to the next flower, that time these anthers, these pollen grains will be sifted onto the body of female flower, the fertile flower, that is what the long stylate female flower. So this is what the pollination occurs. So is it clear to you all? In Hypanthidium, three types of the flower, one male flower, that is fertile always, two female flower, out of these one is fertile and one is sterile. The fertile flower is always the long stylate, the short stylate flower is the gall flower, and which is being used for the purpose of ovulation by the wasp. So wasp enter inside with the help of a single pore on the flower, that is called as ostiole, and when it enters due to the congested network of the stamen and the stigma, the pollen grains will be loaded on the body of wasp, and finally it will be used for the purpose of pollination. So now moving on to the next case is the pollination in yucca. In yucca, the pollinating agency or pollinator is an insect in a moth, that is called as Pronuba eucacella. Eucacella means what? It is pollinating agency there in the yucca plant. So Pronuba eucacella is a moth which is working for the process of pollination in the yucca. What is specific there in the case of pollination of the yucca? The pollination in yucca is a kind of obligate symbiotic relationship between the plant and the moth. Are you getting my point? Pollination depends on the obligate symbiotic relationship between plant and the moth. What is the meaning of obligate symbiosis? Symbiosis you knows very well. When two organisms lives together, in terms they are benefiting to each other. Obligate means what? They are not having any alternative relationship. They are forced to do such kind of things. Means the pollination is the demand of both the organisms. Life cycle of both yucca and the Pronuba moth depends on each other. Means if the yucca is not there, so Pronuba cannot complete its life cycle, and if Pronuba is not there, then yucca cannot complete its life cycle. So now next one, our next example is arcade, Mediterranean arcade or arcade Ophrys speculum. Here the pollinating agency is a hairy wasp, that is called as Colpa aurea. In case of Mediterranean arcade, the pollinating agency is the hairy wasp, that is called as Colpa aurea. What is specific about that? That is being completed by the process of pseudo-copulation. The pollination is completed by the process of pseudo-copulation. What is the meaning of pseudo-copulation? Pseudo-copulation means what? A false mating. How this comes over, how this takes place. So just listen carefully. The flower of the Mediterranean arcade Ophrys is resembles with the female wasp of the Colpa aurea. Are you getting my point? The flower of the Mediterranean arcade is resembles to the female flower of female wasp, that is colpa aurea. So flower resembles or mimics in the structure and appearance to the female wasp. And one very important thing is that when the larva emerges out, so the condition is protandrous, means what, the male wasp comes out from the comes out prior to the female wasp, and this is what the difference or the duration between that 4 weeks. So the male wasp comes out 4 weeks earlier than the female wasp, and at the time nature plays an important game. What happens, as soon as the male wasp emerges out from the larva, so emerges out from the larva, develops in form of the adult, develops in form of the mature organism. So what it does, the orchid also gets blossom, and as soon as the larva emerges in form of the male flower, it searches out the female, and at that time what will happen, the female that time what will happen, the male wasp enters in the female flower so that it could pollinate it, so that it could copulate it could mate with that, and in due course of the pseudo copulation, pollen grains are being dusted over the male wasp, and that means the pollen is transferred over the female flower for the next event. So it is clear, that is what the pseudo copulation by which the process is getting completed in case of Mediterranean orchid. So what is specific, the female flower of the orchid resembles to the female wasp. To search of the mating partner, the male wasp enters into the female flower and getting pollinated from here. Next type of the pollination from the animal resources is called as Calotropis. In Calotropis, the translator mechanism is there. In Calotropis, bees are the pollinator, and the pollination occurs through the compound pollen grain that we have earlier discussed. Only the pollinium or the compound pollen grain is there, and here the specific mechanism is called as translator mechanism. That now next one, the Rafflesia, the largest flower of the world. Here the carrion fly are the pollinator agencies. The flowers produce the full smell like the rotten meat. The full smell like the rotten meat. It is similar to that. We have seen that in the case of Aristolochia, the foul smell is being produced, and due to that foul smell, the flies are being trapped. Flies are being attracted toward, and here also in case of Rafflesia, this is a total root parasite and the largest flower of the world. So carrion flies are the pollinator agency. So flower is producing a kind of foul smell like a rotten meat, and due to that foul smell, the flies are being attracted toward them. They are being pollinated. Whenever the seeds are being produced, they are being dispersed with the help of elephant. So that is called as zoochory. The seed dispersal by the mean of elephant, that is called as zoochory. Strict, very specific point, very specific note here, because we are just going to complete the insect pollination here. Some aquatic plants are there, some hydrophytes are there, like nymphia or water lily, water hyacinth or ecornia, lotus, nilambo, and alisma too. Four specific plants are there: nymphia, water hyacinth, lotus, and alisma too. They all are hydrophytes, means they all are the aquatic plants. So they need to perform the hydrophyly, but what happened, they are performing the entomophyly. What they are doing, they are performing the entomophyly. This is very usual question. There is very exceptional cases where aquatic plants are performing the entomophilic pollination. What are the example of those plants? Nymphia or water lily, water hyacinth or ecornia crassipes, lotus, nilambo, and the alisma. So after completing the first agency of the zoophily, that is insect or entomophyly, now we are moving on to the next one. Next type of the animal pollinating agency or the animal pollination is called as ornithophyly. Ornitho word is used for the birds. So the pollination by the help of birds. So when the pollinating agencies are the birds, then it is called as ornithophyly. So example of the bird, those who are performing the ornithophyly, those who are helpful there in the ornithophyly are called as sunbirds and the hummingbird. And in which plant they are performing the ornithophyly, that is called as the begonia. So sunbird and hummingbird are performing the ornithophyly there in the begonia. And another example is their honeybird in bottlebrush, silk cotton, coral tree, and the Butea monosperma. Are you getting my point? The hummingbird and the sunbirds are performing the pollination or ornithophylic mode in case of begonia, while the honeybird performs the ornithophilic mode of pollination in the bottlebrush, silk cotton, coral tree and the Butea monosperma. So remember what is specific about the bird, those who are performing the ornithophily. The bird should have the long beak and small sized of the body. The what is importance there in the bird which are performing the ornithophily, the bird should have the long beak and the small body size. Long beak means the pollination will occur with the help of beaks, not by the feathers or the body. So pollinating agency there in the bird is the long sized beak. And remember, the bird is neither going to sit on the flower surface nor going to sit on the shoots where it is being attached to the main plant. It is only hovering or roaming around the flower. It is hovering or roaming around the flower. At the time of collection of the nectar, it enters only the long beak inside the nectaries, and in due course of the time, the pollen grains are loaded over the beak. So whenever it is moving on to the next flower for taking the nectar, so that time whatever the pollen grains are loaded on the beak, so what will happen, they will be landed onto the stigma of the same another flower. And what is about the flower, what is the characteristic of the flower? Flowers are brightly colored so that it can be easily visible by the birds. They are producing large amount of pollen grain because they have to satisfy the need of the bird. So they are just going to produce the large amount of the pollen grain, and they are having the enough amount of nectar, because if less amount of nectar is there, so bird will not be attracted toward the flower. So what is the property of the bird? They should have the long beak and the small size body so that it could hover thereon, and long beak is used as the pollinating device. In case of insect, the body hairs were the pollinating device, the wings were pollinating device, and here what happens, the pollinating device is the long beak. In the flower characteristic, the brightly colored so that it could be easily visible, large amount of the pollen grain and enough nectar is required so that it could satisfy the need of the bird. Next type of the pollinating agency is bats. So by the mean of that, the pollination is called as chiropterophily. Chiropterophily means what? When pollinating agency is the bat. So the flower, what are the property of the flower? The flower must be large size so that the bat could be holded thereon, the bat could be managed thereon. So example of such kind of the flower is there. Anthocephalus kadamba. Kadamba is a commonly known as kadam plant. So large size the flowers are there. So example for such kind of the plant where the bat pollination occurs, Anthocephalus kadamba. Kadamba commonly known as the kadam plant. Adamsomnia, Kigelia and Musa species. Musa species, the banana varieties. Musa species, the banana varieties. They are also having the some species of the banana is having the pollination with the help of bat. Now next one, Malacophily. Malacophily, the pollination with the help of snails. The example for the Malacophily is the family Araceae, Chrysanthemum and the Lamna. Next one, Myrmecophily. Myrmecophily, the pollinating agency is the Myrmecophily, the pollinating agency is the ants and termites. The example of the plants where Myrmecophily occurs, the acacia, citrus, kikar and the family Rubiaceae. So Myrmecophily means what? When the pollination process occurs with the help of ants and the termites. So here example, acacia, citrus, kikar and Rubiaceae. The last one, sometimes the snakes also plays a role in the shifting or transferring of the pollen grains from one flower to another flower. So such kind of the pollination is called as Ophiophily. When snakes are working as the pollinating agency, then it is called as Ophiophily. And the example for such kind of the flower or such kind of the plant is Santalum. You knows very well in Hindi, in a slok is there, Chandan Visvyapat nahi lipte rahat bujhe. The snakes are always found to be roaming around or present around the Santalum plant. So they are the pollinating agency for the Santalum plant only. So that is called as Ophiophily. So till the time we have completed the complete mechanism of the pollination. So my dear child, I think now it is very much clear how the pollination process occurs. In pollination we have completed The types of pollination, the self and cross pollination. In self pollination and cross pollination, what we did in self pollination, autogamous and the zitonogamous. Autogamous means when within the same flower, zitonogamous in the same plant but between two different flowers. Next one was the allogamy or xenogamy or cross pollination, which is truly a cross pollination on the genetic basis, ecological basis, functional basis, everything. And then we have just seen some of the devices or adaptation being used by the flowers for performing the self pollination and the cross pollination. Later on we moved on to the agencies of pollination, where we have seen two types of agencies, abiotic agencies and the biotic agencies. In abiotic agencies we have seen air. The flowers are very the pollen grains produced in very large quantity so that they could compensate the loss. Very light weighted, dull colored, can fly with the air, and stigma is long and feathery so that it could be easily trapped thereon. They are the pollen grains which are just moving with the help of air. Then second one, hydrophily. Two types of the pollination is there, epihydrophily and hypohydrophily. Epihydrophily means when the surface of the water, hypohydrophily inside the water. Epihydrophily, the wonderful example of that is Vallisneria. Then we have moved on to the pollinating agency, that is known as the insect pollination. So in case of insect pollination, the insects pollinating flowers are brightly colored, well smelled, well nectared. This is a kind of mutual relationship where give and take relationship is there. Means what? In term of when flowers get pollinated, so it will have to give something to the flower in term of that flower get pollinated. So whatever the reward is given or what the reward is given to the flower is nectars, pollen grains for their purpose of nutrition, and somewhere some of the flowers are there like Amorphophallus, where they are providing a safe place to the safe place for the purpose of egg laying also. Then we have moved on to the different mechanism of the specific cases or different specific cases. They are in the there of the entomophily, like that salvia. In salvia, sterile plate, fertile plate method, their lever mechanism or turnpipe mechanism is there. Now next after that, Aristolochia, fly trap mechanism, Ficus urfic, Hypanthodium is there, trapdoor mechanism. Then we have moved on to the Yucca plants. Yucca plant is a obligate mutualism, obligate symbiosis between the moth and the between the moth, that is Pronuba, and the plant. The life cycle of the both depends on each other. Mediterranean arcade, pseudocopulation, Calotropis, translator mechanism, Rafflesia, similar to the Aristolochia, but here the rotten meat smell is there. And one more important thing, we have seen that some of the aquatic plants are there, those who are performing the pollination with the help of insect also. Those are Nymphia, water lily, whiter hyacinth, Ecornia, lotus or Nilambo, and Alisma also. Afterward, the birds may work as the pollinating agency, that is ornithophily, hummingbird, sunbird, honeybirds. Chiropterophily, when bats are working as the pollinating agency. Malacophily, when snails are there. Myrmecophily, when the ants are working as the pollinating agency. And finally the Ophiophily, when snakes are working as the pollinating agency. So I think this is complete. Now I am just going to bind up the topic pollination. In the next lecture, next video, I will just provide you the embryonic development in the plants, because we have just completed the complete process of development of male gametophyte, development of female gametophyte, along with the mean of transferring the male gamete to the female gamete or pollen grain to the female flower. Now the process remains, that is fertilization. How fertilization occurs and how the embryonic development occur, we'll discuss in the further lectures. So till the time, thank you.